Excellent. We are LinkedIn Live. So exciting. I was trying to figure out how to go TikTok Live at the same time, but they updated the app and now you can't turn the volume all the way down. So it creates an echo. And I was like, okay, fine, TikTok. I guess you're like, it's all or nothing. We can't be your side project. But so excited to have you here, Nikki. We'll let people filter in. We'll just give a few seconds for people to filter in. Let us know where you are joining from, and let us know where you're at in the book. Have you not even ordered it yet, which it's okay. This is going to inspire you to order it. Have you ordered it, but you haven't started? You're halfway through, you finished it. So let us know where you're joining us from, and let us know where you are at in the book. Um, Nikki, maybe to kick us off, you can introduce yourself. I hope everybody's knows you already and loves you and your content as much as I do, but just in case.
I'm Nikki Ivey. You may have heard of me. No, I do a thing. No, so I am Nikki Ivey. I'm Chief Revenue Officer at a company called Inclusive with two V's, and we help organizations create a space where everybody at every level of the organization can feel comfortable talking about topics that a lot of folks tend to be apprehensive about or shy away from. And we do that through content, right? Through the way the questions are written and the way the conversations are formed, and then a lot of other fun stuff. But contact me later if you want to hear more about that piece. Let's see what else. What else people might want to know about me and kind of where I'm at. I
Well,
am
definitely at the end, I dropped a slide with your
okay.
LinkedIn to make
Perfect.
sure that people find you, follow you on LinkedIn.
I would love that. I guess I'll just say like why I'm here, right? For this book in particular, as I was getting into, right? So I'm a mother of four. I had my first child when I was 17, and so the story of somebody, getting a lot of no's, people having ideas about them before they even enter a room, and then the struggle to not internalize those ideas. Those are a lot of the things that really resonated with me. And then I got to this point in the book where it's I don't want to give it away.
Give
I'm
it
just
away if people
excited.
didn't read
So
it.
there's
Spoiler alerts. We're going full spoiler
okay.
alert.
And so I just recently got to apply. So there's the part of the book where she's talking about, she's realizing that people are showing up to her speaking engagements.
Mm.
And, that is causing her to, reevaluate what she's asking for these speaking engagements. And she discovers, right, I've been letting people pay me in exposure, right? I've been literally selling myself short. And then she talked about, there were things that she wanted to say yes to because they were, places she wanted to be, people she wanted to meet, but she had to stick to her guns and say no to those things when people, said that they wouldn't, offer what she thought she was worth. And then, after those no's started to come the yeses. And so the other day I just decided, I was like, I'm just going to ask for what I want here in this situation.
Mm.
And I got it. And so I was just like, oh, it's been that, maybe not that easy, but that simple this whole time. And it just sort of, bears out the overall theme of the book, which is like, there really aren't as many, the barriers are real, but the boundaries, right, as they exist inside of your own spirit and your own heart, abating the urge to sort of make those fit into a box that is practical, or, make it something that other folks would call realistic so that, you don't come off as someone who's delusional about the success you can have. But the way she talks about it, you understand this is not necessarily a delusion. It is a radical belief in yourself.
Yes, I know exactly what point of the book you're talking about. And full spoiler alert, she gets two big no's, but then when she gets that yes, they pay her double what
Yes.
she was even asking for. And I think she says something like, and then that was the day that I doubled my rates.
Yep.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. We have some people in the comments joining us. Lori Richardson, the sales OG here. Thank
Oh,
you for
Lori.
joining us. Yes. So also drop where you're at in the book. We have one user that said a short way into the book and enchanted with the author. I think that's a wonderful way to put it. And for folks that are joining us who maybe aren't familiar with Arlan or who haven't read the book yet, Arlan is a queer Black woman. She was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. She had times in her life where she was unhomed. And the sort of thread of the book, if you haven't picked it up, are, those all led her to be somebody who was deeply underestimated, who had to constantly fight for an opportunity to just be in the room, to be a part of the conversation, to be considered. And her ability to turn being underestimated into a superpower. And, now she runs a multi-million-dollar investment firm focused on reinvesting into folks who are underrepresented in the startup space. And we're going to dig into that in one of the questions. But where I would love to start. So I had already written this question before I read your LinkedIn post yesterday about your picker being off. But like full disclosure, I'm such a nerd. I mean, I have like a full highlighted run of show printed off because like this is just who I am.
Oh, not the 90s printed out.
As a human, I'm Nikki. I'm telling you, I can't with myself. But right in the preface, she has a quote about how she makes decisions, and Arlan says, "Because my instincts have served me well in the past, and because I'm it's a hell yes or it's a hell no kind of person, and making decisions that way." And my immediate reaction was, "Oh, that's nope. I'm not there. Like it's not me." I really have struggled trusting my instincts. My instincts have sort of led me astray. And then, of course, 24 hours before we kick off this business book club discussion with that question, you wrote an amazing post about your picker being off. So share what that post was about and how maybe other folks can fix their picker.
Yeah. No, it came out of a real conversation that I had with a mentor of mine, right? This was like one of, the third in a, streak of, times I was in a role for maybe 3 months or 6 months. And there was these things that had been going wrong. And at this certain point of the third one, I was telling this leader like, "Oh man, why does this keep happening to me?" And he just says like, "Your picker's broken. You have been, not evaluating these opportunities in like through the lens of how does this support me? How does this support my goals?" Now, part of that, and I was actually a little annoyed when he first said it to me because I was like, how privileged for you to think that I actually have a choice every time. Sometimes assistants just need a job. So I didn't, think, right, that I had the right to do that or the time to do that. And it wasn't until that conversation and me, being a little bit annoyed with that mentor, and then, taking a moment, always after the annoyance for me comes the actual reflection. And yeah, I did. I wanted to know what could I have done, right, to keep myself out of those situations. And one of the number one things was, as I mentioned, as it sounds like Arlan's been doing in the book, right, is just this idea of, coming from this place of your own mission. You don't belong to anyone, and there's no one that can make you, just by the things that they say. They can't make those things be true, right? And so, yeah, so then I started asking the right questions. I started really digging into some of the stories that people who are in these roles are telling, and then, sort of charging people up in an interview. Like I talked to a few people and they tell me this is going on. What are we doing? And that was such a confidence builder for me because people responded to the sort of boldness of that in a positive way. And I think it's because they had been underestimating me, and just me calling these things out and demonstrating that kind of confidence made them question why. they had been underestimating me. And sometimes the answer had to do with their bias, right? A lot of the time, the answer had to do with their bias. And other times, yeah, it just had to do with, they didn't know what to make of someone like me, which again is something that I really identify with when I read about, you know, all of the intersections of identity, right? Or the intersection of the identities that Arlan kind of lives in, and how each of those contribute to bias and contribute to her being underestimated. It's why it's so remarkable that, she comes through all of that and, becomes wildly successful.
Mm-hmm. This book was emotional for me. Like there were a couple of points where I had tears in my eyes. There were a couple of points where I had to like set the book down for a little bit and just kind of sit with with the emotion or with what she had shared. It looks like we've had a few more people join us. So hello, thank you. It actually looks like a few people that have not read it yet and are showing up just to hear the conversation. So shout out to those folks. And this will surely inspire you. Lori said it's in her book parking lot. So I feel like this is going to inspire you to move it into that VIP.
I'm actually curious. I'm curious of how many people, because I did the audiobook.
Mm-hmm.
She reads, but only, sometimes. But anyway, so I did the audiobook, and I love to do that when it's the author telling the story. I thought that was really impactful. So I'll just put that out there. If you haven't read it, you don't have like the hard copy of the book, it's worth it. If you've got your little Audible subscription, use your credit, and listen to the book, because again, like you're getting the emotion and the tonality behind the words, and you can, for me anyway, it made it resonate that much more.
That's a good shout. Yeah, like a totally different layer. I'm not reading it in my own words or like through my own like lens of where I would put emphasis, but having Arlan read it. Yeah, okay. Now I kind of want to go back and listen to the audiobook as well. So we were talking a bit about like asking some of those tough questions, not ignoring red flags. I think that particular part of your post on your picker being broken was a bit of like a gut check for me, because I would often go into interviews and have these boundaries or have these questions like, why is your entire board like cishet white men? And they would be like, well, we're working on it. It's important to us. And I'd be like, oh, okay. Yeah, no, we'll proceed. When really I should have been like, if it was important to you, you already would have done.
Right. Or just like a more specific, right? Oh, what does that look like? You're working on it. Tell me more.
Yeah. Yes. So I loved that piece of it. And something that you just said, Nikki, about like not initially feeling like you had the right to have those expectations or to ask those questions. And I think you're spot on. And I don't think it's just you and I and Arlan that have had those experiences, right? I think it's really, really common. Really, if you have like any layer of marginalization, and then the more the layers compound, I think the harder it becomes, what you see in this book. But one of the things I wanted to share and just paint a picture for folks around is what the funding mix looks like in the VC world. So there's a part in the book on page 5, if folks are following along or want to check out, where Arlan talks about the fact that 90% of VC funding, which is literally tens of billions with a B, tens of billions of dollars a year, are going to white men, which leaves that pool of 10% to go to everybody else. And she makes a point of course, saying it's not equally distributed from there. There was some new data that just came out a couple of months ago from like Crunchbase and PitchBook on 2021 funding, and only 2% of funding went to people that didn't have a white male co-founder. So like even worse, right? So it's not like it's 10%, that's terrible, but at least it's, a couple points. Like you still have to be standing next to a white man to be taken seriously, or you're left with that even smaller pool. of 2%. And I think often when I have conversations, and I'm sure that you found this as well, but I'd love to hear your take. But when I talk to people, like they literally can't fathom how stacked the deck is.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
they just can't imagine it. So you have made diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging a cornerstone of your career, and I'd love to hear your approach to like educating folks on what reality is.
Well, a lot of the time, right? I mean, I've tried a lot of different ways.
You
Anybody
tried
that
it
was looking
all.
at my content, anybody was looking at my content in 2020, right? During the, either the Great Awakening or the Great Uprising or the Great We Not Taking It No More. But anyway, right? At that point, it was very like pointed, and in a way that I think made it difficult for some people. A lot of people were cheering me on, right? And they're still, they're my people. But there were, folks who just weren't going to respond to that. And as you well know, those are the folks who need the message. So I started to try curiosity.
Mm.
So rather than, say I'm talking to a leader or somebody who is responsible for, has some kind of influence on, hiring more underestimated folks, and then supporting them when they're there, rather than say, this is trash. Why are there only, why is the company hemorrhaging women, for instance? I formed it as a question. It looks like, in the last 18 months, we've had 3 women leave in a row. What do you think that's about? What do you think that means? And so, just trying to take, it's hard for me, for my facial expressions of my voice, to not tell that little frustration underneath.
I'm going to go off camera real quick. I have a question to ask you.
I'm like, no, but but just putting it like that and then causing them to think like, now they know exactly what you're doing, but there's no place for them to run at that point. I haven't been mean to you. I haven't accused you of being a bad person. I'm just curious. And then I find that that's a more effective way into those conversations. The other piece of it, though, has been simply to show up as myself in a way that, again, which I really identified with in the book, in a way that doesn't, well, not even in a way that, but because what I'm trying to prevent is from my behavior, my attempts, right, to get where I'm trying to go, to reinforce this idea that, if you want to go far, you have to basically take the blueprint of a white dude, right? So it's this situation where, you have, again, this is what I'm dealing with here. We're dealing with a group of folks who will up and down say it's an irony. There's no such thing as white privilege, but if you want to be successful, do these things that white dudes do. Help me understand. The reason why or you're suggesting that I do the things that way is because you know that that's where the privilege lies and that that's the way. So anyway, again, the way that she in the book learns about that and finds a way to do it as herself, that's what I ended up having to do. So after the curiosity piece, I, little things like Nikki Ivey is what most people know me as. Growing up, my mom has always called me Nikki. It's the name that people in my family call me. But when people would find out that Nikki is short for Shaniqua, it kind of it started to feel like I was hiding. It never occurred to me, right? Like, I love my name. Shaniqua is actually a very uniquely Black American name. Right? I was born in 1981. This is a time in America where Black people are sort of reaching for our heritage, and it's difficult to find because we had been so, separated from it. And so we started, you see these names that feel like they harken back or trying to, be a part of that. But because we know that they're not in, most of the time, in actual language or dialect, that's when you're looking at a distinctly Black American name. And I'm very proud of that. But then I was like, if a young Black female seller is coming into this profession And she knows that Nikki is short for Shaniqua, but she sees that I professionally only go by Nikki. What am I telling her? I'm telling her that you must anglicize yourself in
Mhm.
order to be successful. And I know I don't believe that. So in addition to having the conversations curiously, I started to again look at how I was showing up and be as much myself as possible so that folks would see that and know you don't have to do anything other than who you are in order to get where you go.
I love that. I love so much about that. Flexing some of those elite sales skills, leading with the curiosity and the empathy, that tell me more, help me understand. I love it. Um, for anybody that has never like done any reading or listened to any podcast about the taking back of the Black American story through naming, it's powerful. It's fascinating. It was frankly something that I I don't think I'd ever thought about, or I'd never learned about until maybe like 3 or 4 years ago.
Mhm.
Um, and I love it. So, what did you on your LinkedIn? Did you just have Nikki Ivey, and
I did.
then you updated it for?
Yep, there in 2020, right? When I started to hear the talk, and I want to touch on something you said, right? So you're talking about the extreme lack of diversity in, venture capitalism, but what we know is a lot of the folks who are selling B2B tech, which is the space that I run in, these are companies that are VC funded, right? And so then we're seeing that kind of trickle down it's why you see in my LinkedIn bio that I've mostly been the only Black woman on the sales floor in my career. It's because it's not like it just stops at the VC and then all of a sudden it starts to get more and more, diverse or more and more welcoming or supportive an environment. It's perpetuated. The people who are funding the VCs or who are funding the startups are, for better or for worse, or however unconsciously, they're funding themselves.
Mhm.
And then those people are hiring themselves. And then the people that they have hired are inviting their friends right out of college, the same kinds of colleges, to come and work there. It's fine, no tea, no shade, but that, like, when we ignore that, or when we're so oblivious to the fact that, yes, what we're looking at is something that's systemic, that's when we get into these situations where we're spinning our wheels and then I have to go get curious with somebody's boss.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like talking about sales, sales is still predominantly male.
Yep.
It's predominantly white. When we get into sales leadership, depending on what study you're citing, about 17 to 19% of B2B sales leaders are women. And when you look at female sales leaders of color, that drops down into the single digits.
Yep.
So you're so right. It's not like it stops at where the VC funding is going. Like the roots are deep. And so often, because I think these companies become so insulated,
Right.
like they don't even see it in themselves. There's a point in the book where like Arlan was talking about just wanting to be given the same chance
Yep.
that she saw everybody else getting, and like there was another piece where, and tell me if you remember this, where she was talking about how she was pretty darn confident that the male founders that were going in and asking for funding weren't getting asked the same questions. And it was
Yep.
questions about like, well, what about your background? Really questioning her education. Do you think you can handle raising a family and doing business at the same time? And even last year, before I decided to do sales team builder full time, I was interviewing for like VP of sales roles.
Mm-hmm.
Series A, Series B companies. Almost every single person that I interviewed with was like a cishet white man. And I got questions like, well, why would you be afraid to come on as a 1099? You don't need benefits. You don't even have children. Or I left a job because of like deep, like sexual harassment, like verbal abuse. And then being like, are you sure that's really the reason that you left?
Yeah. How loaded is that? Right? Like it again, like so this is the situation people are in a lot of the time. It's like, so somebody is looking at my resume or my LinkedIn.
Mhm.
They say, oh, she was only at this place for 3 months. Now, likely this was a place that I left for culture reasons,
Yeah.
right? I was tokenized on this actually happened to me. I started work at this company and they were like, we need to get her picture on the website so we show up more diverse. And I'm like,
Mhm.
okay. So I didn't last very long there, but I cannot answer. I didn't feel like I could answer that question honestly because who is in the people in the room, I wasn't confident that they wouldn't see just
Yep.
me asking the question or telling that story truthfully as a red flag, right? If she was, someone who is whining about microaggressions over there, it's just going to become an issue for us over here. And of course, they would never say those things out loud. But you're right. They're sort of a lot of the time sussing out what kind of a problem, you'll
Mhm.
is it worth that problem, for you to be hired, and then that level of pressure, right, which I'm sure you have probably experienced as a woman in a not that diverse industry, is because then even when you get the job, that pressure is still there because you're aware of how deeply underestimated you've been. And your choice then is to either see yourself as the exception and then just get all, excited about that. I'm, doing better than most folks that come from this circumstance. And that means there's something great about me. Or you can decide to reject all of that and focus on, again, what calling out what the actual system is, and then refusing to do business with or work with people who are still perpetuating that. Again, like whether they're doing it consciously or not, is doing harm. And it is every single day I'm having to be really intentional about, asking myself, am I reinforcing? But what I was saying about that pressure is, if I'm the only woman here and I miss quota or I fail in one way or another, it'll confirm all the reasons they
Yep.
underestimated me. And then they won't hire any other women, right?
Yep.
Or if I talk too much about the things that I'm experiencing that are negative in the culture, right, they won't hire another Black person. So they don't want to hear all of that. They want somebody pressuring them every day about like DE&I stuff. So yeah, for a while, I didn't ask those questions, or I didn't tell the truth when they asked me. And sometimes when I did tell the truth, what was also frustrating, maybe you've experienced this too, is they would say things like, oh, you must have been surrounded by just really ignorant people. Oh,
Mhm.
I can't believe, meaning I don't believe, I can't believe people would say stuff like that to you out loud. That would never happen here. We take culture very seriously. And I'm like, only, a couple of days into the role, I'm already experiencing those things again. Right. And so it is, I think, a lot more than people think about, but in a way that Arlan really makes clear, that again, there are like hard barriers. There are real things that have to do with identity and your sort of circumstance, that all have to get reconciled, dealt with emotionally, coped with, before you even walk through the door.
Yep. Yep. Oof. That like like I can't believe that that still happens. Oh, you can't? Can't you? Do you not speak to people? What? Oh my gosh, I'm with you. Okay, let's take a small pivot, because something else that Arlan talks about a couple different times during the book, is like the concept, like all of chapter 4 is the concept of there's no such thing as self-made. Chapter 26 is the dangers of hustle porn. And as you know, as the folks joining us, and like I see some amazing names here, Cynthia, Lydia, thank you for taking time out of your day to join this conversation. I talk a lot about like anti-bro culture, death to toxic hustle culture, and something that you shared earlier in the discussion, Nikki, was around like the recipe for success being the drag and drop recipe that folks with a huge amount of privilege have used, and that just simply doesn't apply to everybody.
Yeah.
So she says on chapter 181, or sorry, page 181, the industry is obsessed with hustle, and I get it. Hustle is great. I've grown up hustling for what I need. And when you see someone succeed through hustle, it can be really inspiring. But if we place too much emphasis on it, it can be obscured. And she goes on to talk about the dangers of glamorizing hustle, the dangers of romanticizing the notion of the self-made man, because let's face it, literally nobody ever has been self-made.
Right.
And the sort of thread is that we put behaviors on a pedestal that disproportionately penalize underestimated people. So I think folks know where I stand, like hashtag death to toxic hustle culture, but I'd love to hear your take on hustle.
It was a longer journey for me. And for the reasons you talked about and that I mentioned earlier, right? Because I thought I had to do it that way, right? I hadn't considered, I'm coming from a different place mental health wise than a lot of the people who are, pushing this hustle pressure. I, again, am coming from a different set of circumstances, and it just isn't what motivates me, right? Being the person that is known as, she gets there early than everybody else and she leaves later and she don't sleep. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, she don't
That
sleep.
feminine urge to prove them wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, I definitely experienced that. I had believed that was the path to success, but it stopped being effective when my body reminded me, in fact, that I am a human woman and that as such, I probably need a nap sometimes, and more than that, right? To be able to attend to my mental health. Salespeople are, pretty susceptible more than a lot of other professions
Yeah.
to, things that burn us out, and even some darker type of things. And the fact that part of that hustle culture includes leave your feelings at the door. It includes, right? Pretend like hearing no for straight 7.5 hours doesn't start to, if at the very least frustrate you, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to pretend, because if you say out loud that this is something that, you're having a tough time with, now you're weak. Now maybe you should find your way out of the profession. Now you should get out of the kitchen because it's too hot.
Right. Insert cliche.
Right. And so it was a lot for me to grow out of that. But like I said, it was just, in a lot of ways, I just hit a wall and I had no choice. But again, it goes back to what I was saying about, my name and even my appearance, right? Like how I show up. I believe that you have to wear muted colors to be taken seriously, and that you can't talk about how fun, like watching RuPaul's Drag Race and Britney Spears on Instagram is, because there's no way you could be in the C-suite if you like those things. But this was part of that as well, right? If people are, I'm really intentional about how we socialize people into this profession.
Mm-hmm.
And if people who they see who are visible or successful or celebrated are the ones pushing that, then now we're completing that, or we're perpetuating that cycle where people think that that's the way you have to be. So that was the last straw for me, is seeing that it doesn't work. And then in 2020, when we saw salespeople were being let go in droves from places where they had left their feelings behind, where they had put everything they had into it, and now they had just those negative emotions to cope with. That's why we saw so many communities emerge out of that time. But I wasn't going to do that. I can't, in good conscience, put this. And even if I know, yes, working hard, as she says in the book, right, it's important. At the end of the day, it can cause harm. The potential to cause harm by telling people to run themselves in the ground is enough for me to not tell people to run themselves into the ground.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I always make sure when I'm, kind of having debates with people, when I'm trying to lead with curiosity and conversations about like hustle culture and bro culture, is to be really clear that hard work and toxic hustle culture are not the same thing.
That part.
And I don't know why that, like, it has no right to be as emotional and as heated for people as it is. But man, like, folks are emotionally involved in the concept of like hustle and I'm going to grind it out. And I wake up at 3 in the morning. And if you don't wake up at 3 in the morning, it's not because maybe you have a variety of factors that prevent it. It's because you don't want to win, or you somehow don't deserve to win if you're playing by your own set of rules or bringing your own lived experience into the office.
Yeah, and I mean, like for me on a deeper level, what I identify is, it's built into the cultural DNA, at least in America, right? To, highlight and glamorize those stories where an individual, got out of their circumstance through just sheer force of will, right? It goes back to that self-made myth.
Yes.
But and so when you talk about how that's not all that goes into it, you're taking away from them their own ego, because they have believed that it's all things that they have done and done right and done better than everybody else and done harder that got them to where they are. So if you're saying, no, there are other factors, then it's like, wait a minute, I am special. Why are you telling me that I'm not? Everybody could be special too if they worked hard. And it's just, it's a lot. Sometimes there's not enough curiosity in the world, right, to get people to come around when it comes to that. But I find, right, at least being aware of it myself, and then being able to, help other folks advocate for themselves from that lens. Once they know, oh, okay, this is what I'm looking at, this is where that resistance is coming from. I try to be helpful there.
Yes, I try. Oh my gosh. Okay. So we are a little more than halfway through. I want to break it up with a little exercise. And I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be absolutely putting you on the spot. And I'm putting everybody that is listening right now on the spot as well, because I would love to see them drop their responses into the chat. But there's a whole piece of the book where like Arlan is obsessed with Janet Jackson. There's some like really cute, just like really like emotional stories.
Yeah.
And she talks a lot about representation, and I'd like to hear from you like why representation matters as well, because obviously like I've grown up seeing people that look just like me, sound just like me everywhere. But she specifically talks about when she was on the cover of Fast Company and like what it means to her to see the representation, but specifically what it meant to her to see her own face, the face of a Black queer woman on the cover of a business magazine. And then she goes on to challenge the reader to write their own headline. And so I'd love to hear what your headline would be. I'd love for everybody listening to drop your headline. Like, what is that thing that you want to pick up, whatever it is, in 5 or 10 years and read about yourself? I can kick us off because I had some time to think about it. So I went with, should I read it in like an old, like tiny news person?
Let's go Australian accent. Why not? No.
No, my accents are all so bad. Like, frankly, they all sound like somebody that has just maybe had one too many. No accent that I've ever done is a good one or complimentary to anybody that I am trying to do an impersonation of. But the headline that I came up with was, award-winning author and coach is named Volunteer of the Year. I packed a lot in there.
I love it. And it sounds like we have very similar headlines.
Okay. Take it on me.
And that was one of my favorite parts of the book too. I had not thought about this particular approach to basically like vision boarding or to visualizing the level of success, and not even the success, but the actualization, right? So my headline would be something like, former teen mom Nikki Ivey breaks ground on third, location of her residential resource home for teen moms.
Yes.
So yeah, I've wanted to do that for a long time. People ask me in interviews, that question, what if if money didn't matter and you had and you could do whatever you wanted, what would you do? It's always that. It's always that. And
Mm.
again, it's part of all of this. It's part of systems being barriers. It's part of people underestimating you for your circumstances and how you internalize that. And frankly, it's part of how we as a society fail women, particularly when it comes to affordable childcare, when it comes to the narratives that precede women who have children young or who are raising children single. I was pretty much discarded by my community when I became pregnant at 16, when what would have been helpful, what would have meant that it didn't take me a decade and a half to, recover from all those things financially, would have been if someone had just, you know, stopped making it a moral issue,
Mm.
right? The whole she should have kept her knees together type thing, and instead looked at it through a community lens, right? What are we doing to this community if we throw people away for, this circumstance or that decision? And so ultimately, right, so by the time within that 5 to 10 year period, hopefully I've done several TED Talks about this, and you've seen me on, CNN, and you've seen me on, Good Morning America or something, and then all of that is what would get me to, being able to open this third location where these women, they can stay there for a stint of time if they need to. They're the daycare co-op. See, I've got it all planned out. The daycare co-op is the most important piece of this. So while some moms are at school or at work, other moms are there in the on-site childcare center, and we just help each other that way. This is the community lens, because those women are going to be Black women, white women, you know what I'm saying? They're going to be a bunch of different kinds of women changing the world, overcoming some of the things that maybe we internalized because we were, discarded.
Yeah.
That was a
Yeah.
lot.
No, I really appreciate you sharing that. And it really resonates, just that question of like how does discarding somebody, how does like throwing somebody away for a decision that they made as a child, really at any point in their life, how
Yeah.
does that serve the community
Right.
in any way? Like, how is that making anybody better? And the short answer is it isn't. I think it's really interesting that both of ours are rooted in service.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I wonder what that's all
Hmm.
about. That's why we are here collaborating, having
It's
been
why.
drawn to this book, having been drawn to a calling of talking about DEI, of sharing our lived experiences, despite the haters. Uh, anybody else? Did anybody else come up with one that they want to drop in the chat? Let's see here. I'm not a tree. I'm challenging new horizons. That would be a weird headline, but I like the gist of it. I like it. I like it. All right. Well, you don't worry if you're not comfortable sharing your headline in the chat, but I thought it was a great call to action, so I wanted
Yes.
to take a moment to just bring it live. Okay. Let's see. Where else are we at? Oh my gosh, we only have 15 minutes left, Nikki. This went way too fast.
I'm
No,
sorry, I'm so long-winded. That's what did it.
no, it's because it's a good conversation. Okay, this one I need to spend some time here, because I think for me, this was a piece of the book that I genuinely I had to sit with. Like, I had to read it a few times. Arlan talks about it a few times, but there's one piece where she explicitly says, like, privilege is not inherently bad. Privilege is something that you're born into.
Yeah.
It's a hand-me-down heirloom. There is a difference between privilege and how you use it. Entitlement being the way you use it, and often the way it is used for evil. And I've never heard it described that way. I've never heard it described so succinctly, and it just, like, right now I'm like feeling emotional again. Like, it just really it hit me. So I mean, folks in the comments, let us know your thoughts on this. And Nikki, I would just love to hear, like, if this was something that hit you as well. Like, what did you think?
It definitely did. I was seeing it from how does it fit into what I do day to day? That's the first thing that resonated, right? 'Cause in the work that I do, DE&I work, one of the biggest barriers, right, for a lot of folks is just accepting that privilege exists because
Mm.
they think that privilege is synonymous with entitlement. So I thought, wow, to be able to sort of overcome that particular form of resistance to to progress, really, but to DE&I initiatives and to even talking about this stuff, I thought this is a really effective way to do it. And it is an effective way also for me to acknowledge my own privilege, which is something that people lose sight of a lot, especially with people like me, right? I talk so much about these DE&I topics, and because I'm a Black woman, often that is the focus. And so then people forget that what I'm also is a straight woman in America, and that comes with a lot of privilege,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of privilege. And so then when I then have to stop and think, well, how have I managed to understand and acknowledge that that privilege exists and not behave in a way, right, that would suggest that I think I'm entitled to that privilege. It is something you practice over time. Now, some people are just inclined to do so, but it is something that you have to really be intentional about. And I think again, when I'm so outspoken about these things, it can be perceived that there's some moral superiority or like I know everything about every kind of privilege. I don't. There are identities or folks, cultures that I don't have any experience with, that I would be just as clumsy as someone might be with me about Black women. Do you know what I mean? And I
Mm-hmm.
think there's an opportunity in there. That's the common ground, And when we talk about belonging, right, or this trail, right, from diversity to inclusion and then to belonging, there's equity in there, but we'll set that piece aside for just a second, right? But I think it was DeAndre Lewis might be the person that I heard say this, but I don't want to take credit for it. But it really made it make sense for me in terms of us all having something that we're clumsy about. And he said, of course, diversity is getting invited to the dance. You've heard this. And then, inclusion is being asked to dance. But then the question becomes, what music are we dancing to? Is it even in a language I understand? Do I know the steps?
Yep.
And if we none of us knows the steps, then belonging a lot of the time looks like us just out there being clumsy together, figuring it out. People are so afraid of that because they think they'll be the only one who doesn't know the steps. And maybe I know all the steps to, the Macarena, for instance, right? But I don't know the steps to the TikTok dances my kids are doing. So at a certain point, we do all have to try and figure out how to put into perspective our own privilege and then how to find the opportunities, right, to reject it outright, and to again acknowledge how clumsy each of us ends up feeling, depending on our identity and who we're surrounded by.
That's a great analogy, and I think a really meaningful call to action. And it can be scary to talk about diversity and privilege and these extremely important topics because you're going to get it wrong.
Yep.
Like, you're going to get it wrong. And I feel like if you are the type of person that is publicly talking about these topics, it's probably because you care deeply. So when you get it wrong, it's going to hurt
Yep.
even more.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a really lovely call to
Lovely. But here's what frustrates me in our particular field about this is because salespeople, as a skill set, as a daily practice, we never stop at I'm going to get it wrong, I'm clumsy. When you start in a new sales role, if you're not willing to sound dumb the first few times that you do
Mhm.
this pitch or this cold call, and just I'm going to sound stupid stops you, you fail.
Yeah.
Why we're not drawing that parallel is beyond me, but it really is. It's not as easy, of course, as learning a pitch, but it is that simple. It's as simple as knowing up front, yes, I'm going to mess up, but the more I practice, the better I'll get. And I can't ever get there if I don't take this step where I might mess up. That is where I would like for us to be as an industry, as a society, when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah. Maybe that is some of that balance between privilege and entitlement as well. Like they feel entitled to not have to be a part of these conversations, to not have to risk making the mistakes or feeling uncomfortable because it's not something that they view as touching them. We know that's wrong. We know it impacts everybody. That's interesting. I'm happy that spoke to you, and looking at the comments, it clearly resonated with other people as well. And I think just the concept that privilege is not a thing. It is
Right.
many layers of things. Like having parents that are still together is a privilege. Like having access to higher education, that's a privilege. Being able-bodied, that's a privilege. Like there are so many layers and so many nuances that come together to create a particular person's privilege. And saying to yourself, like I don't need to be ashamed of my privilege that was inherent in who I am or how I was raised, but I do need to be extremely intentional about how I apply it to the way I go through the world.
Yep, exactly that. Exactly.
All right.
That.
Okay, in our last few minutes here, I want to sort of circle back to where we started, which is you like making that pivot to show up and be like 100% you. I think I'm on the journey still. I bring more and more of myself every day. Certainly more on TikTok than I do on LinkedIn. I still often like don't feel safe. Don't like there. I'm not there. I'm on the journey. But as Arlan brings the book home, she shares this quote that, being so deeply, truly yourself, that is the answer. And one of the reasons I do think that my content has done increasingly better over the last 2 to 3 years is that I have been a lot more raw and a lot more authentic. And I've talked about topics that I know are going to piss people off. But that's what's important to me. So here, you get it. And I just love that you have your own voice and your own lived experience, and what you have to share, literally nobody else can share. And there's something so special about that. That wasn't really a question. That was just me rambling on because I was like, yes, Arlan, yes. But I mean, share your thoughts, or maybe
this resonated with me for a lot of the same reasons that you're talking about, and I am still on that journey as well. Why the reason it resonated with me is because it reminded me of this conversation I had again with a mentor, different mentor this time, and he was like, when you look at, this was 2020, maybe 2021 early. He was like, when you're looking at who is visible, right? Who is leading thought in the space that you work in, who's being listened to, who is it that you are, looking up to, or, who are you waiting for to be that person that leads this charge? Who are you shrinking yourself for? And he just looked me dead in the face. We were on a Zoom just like this. And he said, it's you. You're the person. You're the person you've been waiting for to come along and inspire you. You're the person. And I hadn't thought of it that way. There are people who I very much look up to in this industry. Lori, you said Lori's here. She's one of them. Chantel George, Cynthia Barnes, Gabrielle Blackwell, all the names, right? And I had to understand that looking up to these folks is different from believing that I have to be just like them in order to be successful, which was a breakthrough for me in a real way. Because I think I would have, this same mentor also told me, he was a black man, he is a black man. And, he was talking about trying to fit in. It's like, you're going to lose anyway. Try as you might. You can only be yourself. It's really the only option.
Yeah.
So he's like, what do you might as well just accept that it's you. And that's something I say to myself in the mirror before I leave to do something that might make me nervous, or where I might think, does anybody even really want to hear what I have to say? I go there, I look in the mirror and I say, Nikki, it's you. It's you, baby. Queen stuff. And then I walk out, except I don't say stuff. And then I walk out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, again, the whole book, that's one of the major themes is this. She's wearing her purple tennis shoes and her black hoodie. And if you are the person, right, who underestimates her because of that, she understands that that is a you thing, and just doesn't shrink to accommodate that.
Yes.
Which again is still something that I have to practice and try and get out ahead of on a daily basis.
Doesn't shrink to accommodate that. Yeah. There's a trend that's something along the lines of like, I'm not too much, you're too little.
Yeah.
I
I'm
love
called
that.
extra a lot in my life, and
Yeah.
in a lot of ways I am. But
Have you seen my LinkedIn headline? Like I am super extra. I like to send 3 exclamation points at the end of a sentence. It makes me happy. I like to send emojis and slacks. I really like the dancing parrots. That stuff makes me happy. I don't care if people show up and they're like, that's unprofessional or nobody's going to take you serious. I'm like, okay, well, I can lead a joyless life.
Yeah.
Or I can show up and do the things that are true to me, that bring like that playfulness and that fun and that creativity into life and to work.
The last frontier for me, Leslie, is not accepting people are allowed to not take me seriously because I have such a youthful spirit, right? People are often surprised to hear that I'm like a grown up, like and you know what I mean? And so then I start to, again, wear less pink. Don't change your wig more than once in a week, because if they saw you blonde yesterday, it'll freak them out if you're brunette the next day.
Go back to orange.
Things, right? And it's like, I can't be anything else. It's more fun when I'm me. And when I'm being myself, I'm then again implicitly letting other people know that it is a viable path to success and actualization.
Oh my gosh. There's a quote at the end of the book. And in my notes, I literally said, I feel like this could be a Nikki Ivey original quote. But Arlan says, I decided that my success would be my activism.
Yes. And that's the story of Backstage Capital, right? That's the story of this tenacious woman who's like, I like this band. Let me see if I can get them some shows. Like all of that. That's the story of that is her living out what you just read.
I love it. This book was honestly like I might go back and listen to the Audible just to hear Arlan narrate it. This book was really special. I'm really grateful that she wrote it and that I had a chance to read it. I'm really grateful that you took time after like a 12-hour conference before another networking dinner to sit here and have this conversation with us. So thank you so much, Nikki.
Thank you. This was so much fun, and I was really flattered and honored for you to invite me to this. And I hope that, something I said was helpful, or at the very least inspired somebody to go out and read this book so that they can find, parts of it that resonate with them.
Amazing. Well, thank you to everybody who joined us, spent some time this Tuesday. What day of the week is it? Tuesday evening. Tuesday evening with us. Do not forget to find Nikki on LinkedIn and follow her. I'm assuming most of you are already connected to me on either LinkedIn or TikTok, but just in case, drop my handles as well. And next business book club is Atomic Habits, which it's a real pivot on this book.
No.
But it's an incredible book. So I look forward to seeing folks for that. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.